In 1969, Bill Macy stood on the stage of O Calcutta in New York, completely naked, before hundreds of audience members. He was already 47, an age when many actors begin looking back at what they have achieved, while Bill's name was still unfamiliar to most of the American public. The production caused a sensation with its scenes of nudity and its refusal to shy away from putting sexuality on stage. When asked how it felt to appear that way night after night, Bill simply replied matter-of-factly, "The nudity didn't bother me. I'm from Brooklyn." That calmness made it difficult to imagine just how long the road behind him had already been. Bill did not enter the theater with the status of a star, nor did he have a famous role that audiences would recognize when he appeared. At 47, he was still searching for something that many much younger actors had found long before, a role big enough to make people remember his name. Then, only a few years later, something strange happened. The man who had once been almost unknown began getting stopped on the street by complete strangers. They called him by a name that was not Bill Macy, asked him about a wife who was not his wife, and even expressed sympathy for a marriage he had never lived. One role had made the line between Bill Macy and his character almost disappear, but to get there, he had had to wait nearly half a lifetime. Bill Macy was born on May 18, 1922, in Revere, Massachusetts, with the birth name Wolf Martin Garber. He was the son of Michael Garber and Molly Friedopfer, and grew up in a Jewish family whose roots lay in European immigrant communities, with his paternal grandparents coming from Lithuania, and his mother's side having Austrian Jewish origins. His father worked in manufacturing, while the family had no professional background in theater, film, or music. Because of that, Bill's early years offered no clear indication that the boy then known as Wolf Garber would one day spend most of his life in front of audiences and cameras. When Bill was still young, the family moved to East Flatbush in Brooklyn, where most of his childhood unfolded in a neighborhood with a large concentration of working-class families and immigrant communities. Bill grew up within the Jewish environment of his family and neighborhood, but the surviving material about this period is fairly limited and gives no indication that he was prepared from childhood for a life in performance. There is no prominent story about childhood performances, a children's theater troupe, or a moment when an adult discovered some special talent in him. The stage seems to have remained outside Bill's world for much of the time he was growing up in Brooklyn. Bill attended Samuel J. Tilden High School, a public school in Brooklyn, named after former New York Governor Samuel J. Tilden. His high school years likewise left no notable theatrical milestone in the surviving biographical records, and when he left school, Bill still had no clear path leading toward Broadway or the entertainment industry. He did not come from an artistic family, nor did he have ready-made connections that could bring him into New York theaters. But before Bill had much time to search for a direction for his adult life, history pulled his life onto an entirely different course. In 1942, when he was about 20 years old, Bill joined the United States Army at a time when America was already deeply involved in World War II. He was assigned to the 594th Engineer Boat and Shore Regiment, a unit responsible for operations involving transportation, amphibious landings, and logistics between land and waterways. Instead of beginning his 20s with a steady job in New York or trying his hand in the theaters not far from where he had grown up, Bill left the United States and was sent to the Pacific Theater. The first years of his adult life, therefore, unfolded thousands of miles from Brooklyn, in the middle of a war that, at the time, no one knew exactly when would end. Bill's unit operated in New Guinea and the Philippines before he spent time stationed in Japan. Bill later said little publicly about what he had witnessed during the war years, and his military service did not become a story he frequently used when speaking about himself. What can be established with certainty is that he spent 4 years, from 1942 to 1946, in the Army, a period that occupied nearly all of his early 20s. When he returned to civilian life at the age of 24, Bill was still not a professional actor, nor had any opportunity yet appeared to suggest that the stage would become his future. After leaving the Army in 1946, Bill Macy returned to New York at the age of 24, but the road to the stage did not immediately open before him. He had no name recognition, no family background in the entertainment world, and no established stage career capable of providing him with a living. The post-war years were therefore largely a period of making ends meet, interspersed with attempts to find opportunities to perform. Bill took a variety of jobs, but the occupation that stayed with him longest during this period had nothing to do with the stage lights: driving a taxi. For nearly a decade, Bill drove a cab through the streets of New York. The job brought him into contact every day with all kinds of passengers, from ordinary working people to people leading completely different kinds of lives, all appearing in the back seat of his cab. Bill left no detailed recollections of individual rides and never claimed that driving a taxi directly shaped his acting method, so it would be impossible to attribute to this period influences that he himself never confirmed. But those many years spent amid everyday New York life came before Bill became a professional actor, and his later affinity for portraying ordinary working-class characters would also become an easily recognizable feature of many of his roles. Bill did not wait until he could leave taxi driving behind before trying to find his way into the entertainment world. He took small jobs wherever there was an opportunity to perform, from poetry readings and comedy recordings to brief appearances in films. None of those jobs was enough to turn him into a name that attracted attention. Nor did they provide the stability that someone already past the age of 30 might normally hope for. For years, Bill's life existed between two worlds: the jobs that helped him pay the bills and the small performance opportunities whose destination remained uncertain. By 1958, an important door finally opened. Bill was chosen as Walter Matthau's understudy in the Broadway production of Once More, with Feeling. He was 36 years old at the time. It was not yet a leading role, nor did it bring the name Bill Macy to a mass audience, but for the first time he had a place in a Broadway production alongside an actor who was attracting increasing attention like Matthau. More than a decade after leaving the Army, Bill had finally entered the professional theater world that he had previously been able to approach only through scattered jobs. Broadway, however, did not immediately change Bill's life. The years that followed remained a succession of small jobs on stage, on recordings, and on screen, with very few roles substantial enough for his name to be remembered. In 1966, he appeared in the soap opera The Edge of Night. The role carried a coincidence that was hard to overlook. Bill played a taxi driver, the very job he had performed in real life for many years. After spending so long carrying real passengers through New York, he was now recreating his old occupation in front of the camera. A year later, Bill appeared in The Producers, the directorial debut of Mel Brooks, starring Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder. His part was so small that his name did not appear in the official cast credits. Bill played the foreman of the jury at the end of the trial. When asked to announce the verdict, he delivered just one line: "We find the defendants incredibly guilty." Those few seconds on screen did not change Bill's position in Hollywood, but that brief line would later often be recalled in articles looking back on his career. By 1969, Bill was 47 years old, and still had not found a role that made the American public truly know his name. It was at that point that he joined the original cast of Oh, Calcutta, an off-Broadway revue that quickly became a controversial phenomenon because of its sexual content and the appearance of nude performers on stage. Bill performed in the show from 1969 to 1971. While the nude scenes made the production a subject of widespread discussion, he responded to them with his characteristically dry sense of humor. When speaking about having to appear naked before an audience, Bill simply replied, "The nudity didn't bother me. I'm from Brooklyn." Oh, Calcutta placed Bill in a position entirely different from the small roles he had previously taken. Instead of appearing only briefly, he became part of a production that the entire New York theater world was talking about, even though much of the initial attention came from the work's provocative nature. Bill later also appeared in the film version released in 1972 and took part in other projects outside the stage, including PDQ Bach's 1970 musical comedy album The Stoned Guest, alongside Peter Schickel and Will Jordan. In the late 1960s, Bill Macy was still known primarily within the New York theater world. Oh! Calcutta put him in a production that was widely discussed, but what caught Norman Lear's attention was the comedic ability of this man who was already nearing 50. Bill did not need exaggerated gestures or try to get laughs by overpowering the actors performing alongside him. His face could shift quickly from confusion to irritation, and the way he reacted to his fellow actors' lines, combined with an ordinariness that made him seem almost unlike a Hollywood actor, allowed him to create a kind of comedy that felt very close to real life. Lear saw in Bill a quality that suited the kinds of characters he wanted to bring to television. Norman Lear was then entering the most influential period of his career. Instead of continuing to build sitcoms around families who almost never confronted the issues being debated in the world outside, he wanted to bring those conflicts directly into his characters' living rooms. Bill's first opportunity came with All in the Family, the series that premiered on CBS in 1971, and quickly became one of the most important programs on American television at the time. Bill appeared only in a small role as a police officer, but this collaboration placed him within Lear's creative world, where a very different part of his career was about to begin. All in the Family was also where the character Maude Findlay was first introduced. Played by Bea Arthur, Maude was a strong, outspoken woman with clearly defined political views who rarely hesitated to argue about issues that many earlier sitcoms had avoided. The character made enough of an impression for CBS and Lear to develop a separate series called Maude. As the project was being prepared, they needed to find a man who could stand alongside Bea Arthur without turning Walter Findlay into a character who existed merely as a backdrop for his overpowering wife. Bill Macy was chosen. At the age of 50, he did not fit the familiar image of the ideal television husband. Bill's face carried the features of middle age. His manner of speaking was unpolished, and his demeanor was closer to that of a man someone might encounter on the street than a star created inside a television studio. That very ordinariness became an advantage. Walter needed to be gentle enough to contrast with Maude, but he also had to possess his own pride, temper, and limits so that their marriage would not become one long monologue by the main character. Bill Macy's arrival at exactly this moment was also connected to a broader change taking place in American television. In the early 1970s, the boundaries of the family sitcom were beginning to be pushed further. All in the Family brought race, politics, prejudice, and the generation gap into the arguments within the Bunker household. Maude continued in that direction from the perspective of a liberal middle-aged woman, while also bringing marriage, feminism, and many other social issues into its weekly stories. The characters in Norman Lear's world were no longer expected to be pleasant all the time. They could be wrong, selfish, angry, contradictory, and forced to live with the consequences of their own choices. When that opportunity became a reality, Bill Macy was placed alongside one of the strongest female characters on American television at the time. Maude was developed from All in the Family after Bea Arthur's Maude Findlay made enough of an impression for Norman Lear to build a separate series around her. Maude was outspoken, had clearly defined views, and almost never avoided an argument, while Walter Findlay was a middle-aged husband who loved his wife but still wanted to preserve his own voice and self-respect in the face of her overwhelming personality. That contrast gave Bill a character unlike the brief parts he had previously played, while also placing him in a position more difficult than it appeared. He had to stand beside Bea Arthur without being completely overshadowed by her character. At first, Walter could make viewers think of the familiar type of gentle husband who was regularly outmatched by his wife. Maude would enter an argument and quickly take control of the room, while Walter would often simply look at her wearily, try to argue back, and then realize that he was being pulled into yet another verbal battle. Bill exploited that imbalance through very small things, from a glance and a pause before answering to the irritation gradually building across his face, rather than trying to get laughs by performing more broadly than Bea Arthur. As a result, Walter could lose ground to Maude without becoming a weak character who existed only for the audience to laugh at. Behind the frustration was still a man with his own self-respect, limits, and beliefs. That ability became even more important as the writers did not keep Walter in the position of a husband whose only purpose was to play off the main character. From season to season, he was drawn into stories about work, money, aging, the role of a man within the family, and the increasingly visible instability in the marriage. Walter could be accommodating in one situation but selfish in another, willing to accept change at times, yet capable of reacting fiercely when he felt his position was being threatened. For Bill, that meant a scene beginning with the familiar rhythm of a sitcom could quickly shift into disappointment, anger, or hurt, while he still had to make the audience believe they were watching the same person. The chemistry between Bill and Bea Arthur therefore became an important part of the way Walter existed alongside Maude. In real life, the two were almost exactly the same age, with Bea born on May 13, 1922, just 5 days before Bill, and they became good friends while working together. On screen, that closeness translated into the conversational rhythm of a married couple who seemed to have lived together long enough to know exactly what would make the other person angry. Bea had a deep voice and an ability to deliver cutting lines, while Bill would often wait for her to take command of the space before reacting at precisely the right moment, allowing Walter to maintain his presence without needing to speak more than Maude. His role was to provide a counterweight real enough that Maude's forceful opinions did not simply echo into empty space, and that seemingly modest position increasingly brought Bill more demanding acting challenges. Maude continually ventured into subjects that American sitcoms of the early 1970s rarely addressed directly, from feminism, politics, and race relations, to sex, money, and changes within marriage. Walter did not merely stand beside his wife during those arguments. Many times, he himself became the person forced to confront the distance between the beliefs he had long been accustomed to and a society changing right inside his own family. The first major challenge came in the very first season with the two-part episode Maude's Dilemma, in which Maude discovered that she was pregnant at the age of 47 and ultimately decided to have an abortion. The story aired before the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision, at a time when abortion remained an especially sensitive issue in the United States. But for Bill, the important part of the story was that Walter could not simply stand by while Maude made the decision alone. He had to portray a husband who was also considering whether the two of them truly wanted to begin raising a child all over again when they were nearly 50, while still leaving the final decision to Maude. Scenes like these forced Bill to pull back from his familiar comic reactions and keep Walter in a more serious emotional register without making the character suddenly seem like a different person. When CBS rebroadcast the two episodes in 1973, the controversy became intense, with protest campaigns, some affiliate stations refusing to air them, and advertisers withdrawing their commercials from the episodes. Bill did not become a spokesman for the political debate taking place outside the studio, but the role of Walter placed him at the center of one of the most controversial stories on American television at the time. For an actor who only a few years earlier had still been taking small parts, this was an enormous change. Millions of people were now watching how his character responded to an issue dividing the very society in which they lived. Walter also demonstrated from that point onward that the role Bill had received at the age of 50 would demand much more than the ability to make an audience laugh. Later seasons took Bill into even darker territory, as Walter's instability was gradually pushed to the forefront. The character's drinking became increasingly connected to pressure, disappointment, and a sense of losing control, until it could no longer be treated as a joke about a husband who liked to drink. During one argument, Walter slapped Maude, causing the familiar rhythm of their verbal battles to suddenly cross a different line. Bill now had to make the audience see a frightening side of Walter without trying to soften the act through humor, while still preserving the sense that this was the same man they had been watching since the earliest episodes. The crisis went even further when failure at work began striking directly at Walter's self-respect. The character fell into despair and had a storyline involving suicidal intent, taking Bill into scenes almost entirely opposite to the image of the husband who so often stood before Maude with an expression of helpless irritation. In a sitcom built around rapid dialogue and the laughter of a studio audience, Bill had to shift the emotional tone without breaking the continuity of the character. The helplessness that had once generated laughter now carried a different meaning when behind it lay the sense of failure of a man gradually losing confidence in his own place in the world. That was also why Walter was never reduced to the familiar sitcom stereotype of the long-suffering husband. Bill could move the character from comedy into serious moments without having to change his entire approach to the performance, because most of the movement still took place through his reactions, his voice, and subtle changes in his face. He did not turn Walter into a tragic figure every time the story became heavier. The laughter could still return, just as the arguments with Maude continued. But after everything the character had been through, the audience understood that behind those irritable replies was a man struggling with age, self-respect, and a world that no longer operated entirely according to the things he had once known. During the years Maude was on the air, the show became one of CBS's most prominent sitcoms and drew a large audience, especially in its early seasons. For Bill, that success meant something very different than it did for Bea Arthur, because he had spent more than 2 decades doing small jobs before finally having a character who appeared every week in front of millions of American households. The man who had once driven a taxi, worked as an understudy on Broadway, and had only one line in The Producers, now had a face that audiences recognized even when he was not standing in front of a camera. In his 50s, Bill finally experienced the kind of fame that most of his professional life had never brought him. That level of recognition sometimes revealed itself in ways that were both funny and strange. Strangers who encountered Bill on the street called him Mr. Maude, and some even expressed sympathy because they thought he really had to live with a wife like Bea Arthur's character. Bill said that he would often reply that people like that really did exist, but those encounters also showed just how firmly Walter had become attached to his image. After decades of waiting for the public to remember his name, the irony was that when it finally happened, many people remembered him by the name of a character. That association was both Bill's greatest success and a limitation he had to carry with him after Maude. Bea Arthur won a Primetime Emmy for playing Maude in 1977, while Bill never received an individual Emmy nomination for Walter, even though the character had given him a level of recognition he had never experienced before. What Bill received was not a major trophy corresponding to 6 years of work, but a role so powerful that almost nothing he did afterward could completely replace it in the public memory. For someone who had only truly become famous at the age of 50, that was an enormous reward, but at the same time it created a difficult question for the rest of his career. Norman Lear later called Bill a rare comic actor and said that there was only one Bill Macy. What Lear had seen in him from the beginning was still clearly visible after 6 seasons. Bill did not need to turn every scene into a performance of his own in order for viewers to notice Walter. He could stand beside a forceful performer like Bea Arthur, let her deliver the biggest lines, and then find the smallest opening for a glance, a reaction, or a reply that made Walter emerge as a distinct person. It was precisely that ability that helped Bill avoid what had seemed from the beginning like such an easy fate, becoming the man who stood beside Maude but was never truly seen. By 1978, Maude ended after 6 seasons, with Bill appearing in 141 episodes. He had taken Walter from seemingly lighthearted domestic verbal battles into stories about failure, alcohol, self-respect, and moments when the Findlays' marriage approached limits far more serious than those of an ordinary sitcom. When the studio closed, Bill was 56 years old, more famous than at any previous point in his life, and in possession of a character whose name audiences might continue calling longer than his own. But after waiting more than 20 years to find Walter Findlay, Bill now had to face an entirely new challenge: finding a way to continue working as an actor when the role that had changed his life was no longer there. Even before Maude ended, Bill Macy had begun trying characters outside Walter Findlay. In 1977, he appeared alongside Art Carney and Lily Tomlin in Robert Benton's The Late Show, a supporting role that was not large enough to change the image that had become associated with him on television, but showed that Bill did not intend to limit himself to a single series. Bill did not deal with that challenge by searching for another version of Walter. In 1979, he appeared in The Jerk alongside Steve Martin as Stan Fox, one of the people behind the OptiGrab glasses that turned the main character's life upside down. The film became a major commercial success, earning more than $70 million at the North American box office on a budget of only a few $1,000,000. But Bill occupied only a small part of the story. That very position, however, foreshadowed the new direction he would take. Rather than needing another series built around him, Bill could step into a film for a limited amount of screen time, create a character distinctive enough to register, and then leave the story. That transition became clearer with My Favorite Year in 1982, in which Bill played Cy Benson in a story set behind the scenes of a live television program in the 1950s. Peter O'Toole stood at the center of the film and later received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, while Bill once again occupied a supporting position, where his stage experience and ability to play off other performers could be put to use without requiring him to seize the center of the film. After 6 years of standing beside a performer with as commanding a presence as Bea Arthur, making a supporting character distinctive without disrupting another actor's rhythm had become a clear advantage. Bill gradually found a path that many actors who became famous through sitcoms were not always able to sustain after their shows ended. What was notable was that no second great role appeared to replace Walter Findlay. Instead, the years that followed were built from many smaller roles across both film and television, as Bill naturally shifted into playing fathers, doctors, businessmen, and older men with distinctive personalities of their own. He appeared in series such as Murder, She Wrote, L.A. Law, Perry Mason, and Highway to Heaven, no longer returning to the same studio every week, but continually moving from one project to another. It was not a new peak comparable to Maude, but it helped Bill avoid an outcome that could easily have befallen someone so strongly identified with a single character, disappearing from the screen when that role ended. Age even gradually became part of his advantage. As he entered his 60s and then his 70s, Bill no longer had to maintain the image of the middle-aged husband who had made him famous. His gray hair, increasingly lined face, and familiar voice opened the door to types of characters that suited the man he had become. He continued working in film and television, sometimes appearing in only a single episode, at other times stepping into a major production alongside stars from younger generations. His screen time might have been shorter than it had been in the days of Walter Findlay, but Bill had reached a position where even a few scenes were enough for filmmakers to make use of the familiarity of his face and his distinctive way of reacting. An interesting example came when Bill appeared on Seinfeld. The role was simply that of a resident at Del Boca Vista, the retirement community in Florida where Jerry Seinfeld's parents lived, and it was never constructed as a major comeback for the star of Maude. But it was precisely the smallness of the role that showed how thoroughly Bill had adapted. More than 2 decades after Walter Findlay had brought him into one of the defining sitcoms of the Norman Lear era, Bill could step into an entirely different generation of television comedy, do his part, and leave without the show needing to remind viewers that this man had once been Mr. Maude. By 1999, when Bill appeared in Analyze This alongside Robert De Niro and Billy Crystal, he was 77 years old. As Dr. Isaac Sobel, the father of Billy Crystal's character, Bill once again occupied only a small part of the film, but the commercially successful movie brought his face to an audience whose members might not even have been born when Maude first began airing. That distance revealed the most important thing about the post-Walter period. Bill did not need to surpass his most famous role in order to continue surviving in the profession. He simply needed to adapt long enough for each generation of Hollywood to keep finding a place that suited him. That ability carried Bill well into the 2000s, when most people of his generation had already moved away from film sets. In 2006, at the age of 84, he appeared in Nancy Meyers's The Holiday as Ernie, alongside a much younger cast that included Cameron Diaz, Kate Winslet, Jude Law, and Jack Black. The role was not large, nor was it designed as a comeback for a television legend, but that was precisely what made it fit the path Bill had chosen after Maude. He did not need to be placed at the center in order to continue being a working actor. Looking back on that journey, Bill's post-Maude career did not have a second explosive moment. No role erased Walter Findlay from the public memory. No new series returned him to his former position, and there was no spectacular reinvention of his image in middle age. What Bill built instead was more enduring. He accepted becoming a character actor, allowed age to change the kinds of characters he could play, and continued moving from one set to another for more than 3 decades. The man who had to wait until the age of 50 before all of America recognized him ultimately accomplished something no less difficult than becoming famous, continuing to find work long after his greatest moment of fame had passed. Before his relationship with Samantha Harper, Bill Macy had previously been married to Judith Janis. This is a part of his life that is very sparsely documented. Details such as when the two met, the date of their marriage, or the reason they separated are almost entirely absent from commonly available biographical sources. Bill also did not turn this relationship into a story he revisited in later interviews. As a result, his marriage to Judith remains a quiet gap in his biography, before Bill entered the relationship that would last for nearly the entire remainder of his life. He met Samantha Harper in 1969, while both were appearing in O. Calcutta. At the time, Bill was already 47 years old and still had not found a role large enough to bring his name to audiences across the United States, while Samantha was also an actress in the very production that was stirring debate in New York because of its nude scenes and its direct treatment of sexuality on stage. In the midst of a show famous for breaking the boundaries of contemporary theater, their relationship began rather quietly. There was no love story followed by the press, nor was there the image of a star at the height of his fame finding his life partner, because Bill was still a man who had spent most of his adult life waiting for a real opportunity to arrive. 6 years after they first met, Bill and Samantha married on May 4, 1975. The period between those two moments also happened to be one of the most transformative stretches of Bill's life. In 1969, Samantha met a stage actor nearing 50 who was still unknown to most of the public. By the day they became husband and wife, Maude had turned Walter Findlay into a familiar face in millions of American households. The man who had once driven a taxi through the streets of New York could now be recognized in public, but Samantha had been there before any of that happened. That same year they married. Bill and Samantha appeared on the television game show Tattletales, one of the few occasions when the public was able to see them as a married couple rather than as individual actors. The format of the show was based on celebrity couples answering questions about one another, but Bill and Samantha did not turn that appearance into the beginning of a family life regularly covered by the press. Even after the successful years of Maude, Samantha rarely became part of her husband's public image. Bill's career became increasingly well known, while their life together largely remained outside what audiences could see. That created a particularly striking contrast with Bill's most famous role. On screen, Walter and Maude lived in a marriage constantly tested by money, work, age, ideas about gender, and changes in society. Walter's crises went as far as alcohol, emotional collapse, and violence. Those stories became so familiar that viewers sometimes carried Walter's marriage into real life, calling Bill Mr. Maude, and even expressing sympathy because they thought he actually had to live with a wife like Maude. While audiences knew a great deal about the arguments in the Findlay household, they knew very little about what went on inside Bill and Samantha's own home. That privacy is also why there is no reason to invent additional tragedies that the sources do not document. Bill and Samantha's marriage was not associated with public separations, romantic scandals, or disputes of the kind that often become subjects of the Hollywood press. That does not allow us to conclude that their more than 4 decades together were entirely free of difficulties, but whatever difficulties there may have been, did not become part of Bill's public story. For a man whom millions of viewers identified with a character whose married life was filled with turmoil, the distance between the screen and his real life was all the more striking. Information about Bill's children is also very limited. Major biographical sources discussing his family generally focus on Samantha and do not record the couple as having children together, so there is not enough basis to construct a story about Bill in the role of a father. The clearest known part of his family life remains his relationship with Samantha, who accompanied him through nearly the entire period in which the public knew the name Bill Macy. From the years when Walter Findlay appeared on television every week, through Bill's transition into supporting roles, and then as he grew older in front of the camera, Samantha remained by his side. Bill and Samantha were together for more than 44 years from their marriage in 1975 until his death in 2019. During that time, he moved from the height of Maude through dozens of smaller roles, continued working well into old age, and eventually almost completely withdrew from film and television sets. Samantha remained the partner beside him as his public appearances became less frequent and Bill's life grew increasingly private. After he died and was cremated, his ashes were returned to Samantha, bringing to a close a relationship that had begun in 1969, when Bill Macy was still a 47-year-old actor standing on the stage of O Calcutta, with no idea that the most famous part of his life was still ahead of him. After his appearance in Hawthorne in 2010, Bill Macy largely disappeared from the screen. He never made an official retirement announcement or staged a farewell to his audience. Acting offers simply became less frequent as he entered his 90s. After more than half a century of working on stage, television, and film, Bill spent the final years of his life with Samantha Harper in Los Angeles. He rarely appeared at public events and did not try to return for guest roles simply to maintain a public presence. On October 17, 2019, Bill Macy died in Los Angeles at the age of 97. Samantha Harper confirmed her husband's death, but the cause was not made public. Bill was subsequently cremated, and his ashes were returned to Samantha. The marriage that had begun in 1975 had lasted for more than 44 years, until the final day of his life. News of Bill's death was quickly reported by The Hollywood Reporter, Variety, The Associated Press, CBS, and many other American media outlets. Most of the tributes returned to Maude, the role of Walter Findlay, and the unusual path Bill had traveled before finding success. The image of the actor who had once driven a taxi for nearly a decade and only truly became known across America when he was already 50, reappeared alongside mentions of his roles in The Jerk, My Favorite Year, and the dozens of films and series in which he later appeared. Norman Lear offered his former collaborator a brief but distinctive farewell. He was a rare and great comic actor. There was only one Bill Macy. To Lear, Bill was not simply the man who stood beside Bea Arthur in Maude, but a comic actor capable of creating a highly distinctive character out of seemingly tiny reactions. The Television Academy also looked back on his career, from his years on stage and O Calcutta to his 6 seasons as Walter Findlay. More than 4 decades after Maude ended, Walter was still the image that appeared most often when the media said goodbye to Bill Macy, the character that had come to him very late, but ultimately remained longer than any other role. Bill Macy did not leave behind a career measured by Oscars, Emmys, or a long list of leading roles. His greatest mark lay in Walter Findlay, the character who helped an actor entering his 50s finally become truly recognizable to the American public. In a sitcom built around Maude's forceful personality, Walter still had enough of a life of his own not to be reduced to the husband who merely stood beside the main character. Bill helped the stories about marriage, aging, and social change in Maude retain the feeling that they were happening between real people, rather than simply becoming messages placed into dialogue. Bill's value also lay in the way he performed. He rarely needed to take over the center of a scene, instead often leaving an impression through a glance, a pause, or a very small reaction to the actor beside him. an ability that allowed Walter to move from comedy to seriousness while still remaining the same person. That quality stayed with Bill for decades after Maude, as he became a character actor who could enter a film or series for only a short amount of screen time and still give his character a distinct personality. One interesting detail shows how firmly the name Bill Macy had already been established. When William Hall Macy Jr. began his career, the name Bill Macy was already in use within the professional unions, leading the younger actor to choose the name William H. Macy, by which the public would later know him. Bill Macy is therefore remembered not as a star who always occupied the center, but as an actor who understood very clearly the value of supporting both the story and the performers around him. Walter Findlay was the role that defined his name, but it was his ability to make supporting characters feel as though they had already lived a life before entering the frame that helped Bill remain in the profession for more than half a century. Success came to him very late, but once he had found his place, he did not need to keep recreating that moment in order to prove his worth. Bill's legacy lies in that very persistence, an actor who rarely needed the entire stage to belong to him, yet still had enough presence to remain in the audience's memory after the scene was over. Perhaps the simplest image of Bill Macy can still be found in those moments when he encountered viewers in real life. They did not ask about awards, nor did they mention the years he had spent waiting for a major role. They saw the familiar face and called out, "Mr. Maude." Bill would often smile and respond. After all those years spent searching for a place of his own, the actor who had once been almost unknown had created a character so real that audiences forgot there was another name behind Walter Findlay.